Teal dear, everything is problematic when you have absolutely no idea what the hell you are talking about. Yes, indeed, this means that we can only be dealing with one possible person. Off you go, Laci.
It's that time of the year again. I'm so ready for spooky stuff like horror movies and cavities, but maybe not so ready for the horrors of sexism and racism.
And I'm not ready for the horrors and bullshit that I'm about to watch. But hey, I'm gonna do it anyway.
Well, hey, Laci here. Halloween is a ton of fun, and thanks to the internet, it's also become a bit of a show showcase. Like, wow, look at all the ignorant and insensitive people in America. Yay!
You mean like the typical ignorance that we see around Halloween every year, that you yourself are kind of displaying? You know, with the whole Halloween originally being a Celtic festival of Samhain, a celebration of the blurring of lines between the corporeal and ethereal planes, a celebration and warding off of evil spirits by sacrificing animals and crops on large bonfires, a celebration in which people would often dress up in various costumes resembling animals, dance, feast, make merry, and attempt to predict the future by channeling the spirits of the supposed dead. This celebration was then bastardized a few centuries later when the Romans invaded Celtic land, and combined a couple of their own autumn festivals into the mix, including Feralia, a time to celebrate the honoured dead, and a day to honour Pomona, the goddess of fruits and trees which coincided with the apple-picking seasons. This was then all bastardized even more a few centuries after that, when Pope Boniface IV established All Martyrs' Day on the same day in order to celebrate all Christian martyrs, which was then expanded later by Pope Gregory III, who expanded it to encompass all Christian saints, giving us what we now know as All Saints' Day, and then around 1000 AD, with the spread of Catholicism into the Celtic lands again, we once again find Christianity attempting to hijack another religion, in this case the Celtic culture and their celebration of Samhain, and replicating it for their own All Souls' Day, effectively as a means of converting people to Christianity, a religious Trojan horse, if you will. All Saints' Day being known also as All Hallowmas, because All Hallowed Mass, combining with the fire, harvest, and apple celebration of Samhain, morphed itself into All Hallows' Eve and eventually into what we now call Halloween, by a lengthy process of what I can only think social justice warriors would term cultural appropriation. And this entire festival was taken by Irish immigrants over to America, combining the timing of the early Celtic festival with some of their celebratory traditions, i.e. bonfires, partying and drinking, and celebrating the supposed raising of spirits, with the Roman celebrations of honouring the dead, and celebrating harvests and fruit, hence the apple bobbing, with the All Soul Day celebration of Christianity, from whence we get this idea of going to people's houses and asking for charity, in exchange for the saying of prayers or the singing of hymns, and it became a tradition to give those people bread, because Christianity, of course they were usually sweetened and ended up being called soul cakes. Combine that with a good old bit of Christian fear of witchcraft for some trick-or-treating nonsense, and you have the modern Moroccan celebration. So yeah, Halloween, really interesting holiday, but I've rambled on long enough and I get the very distinct feeling that none of this historical inaccuracy is the sort of ignorance that you're talking about, Laci.
Now, I'm always trying to be a little less than I was yesterday, which I often fail at.
Quitting your job would be the first step towards success in this regard, Laci.
But if you're trying to too, here are some things that we can do during Halloween time. Idea number 1, say bye-bye to slut shame. Sexy Halloween costumes actually became a thing after the sexual revolution. The whole idea behind them was that women have a right to our own sexuality and self-expression. For our generation, Mean Girls definitely solidified the concept of a slutty Halloween costume. But showing skin doesn't mean someone's any less of a human being or any less entitled to basic human decency and respect. If you want to talk scary, slut shaming is often the first mental step someone takes toward justifying acts of sexual violation on Halloween night.
Whoa! Because all men are rapists, aren't they, Laci? Justifying acts of sexual violence on Halloween night. Now, this makes me wonder, Laci, is there in fact a massive spike in sexual offences on Halloween night? Because you would expect that if this is true, there will be a massive crime spike in regards to rape and sexual assault on Halloween night, and probably an increase in report rates in October or November if it's past midnight. So let me just go ahead and do a little bit of legwork for you to see if that assertion of yours has any actual evidence to back it up. And while I was researching this assertion of yours, I found a number of very interesting things. The first was a paper entitled How Safe Are Trick-or-Treaters? An Analysis of Child Sex Crime Rates on Halloween, originally published in Sexual Abuse, a Journal of Research and Treatment, but available on researchgate.net. Now, while this paper is only concerning itself with sex offences where the victim are children, and this paper defines child as anyone the age of 12 or under, I still think it's going to give us a good idea to see if sex offenders or rapists are just more sex offendery or more rapey on Halloween. The means by which this study does this is by drawing data from a publicly downloadable database known as the National Incident-Based Reporting System. The main advantage of the NIBRS is that it provides detailed data on individual, not aggregate, incidents. This includes information about the incident date, the victim, the offender involved, the type of crime involved, the victim characteristics, offender characteristics, etc. And the other really important thing about this study is the time period. This study uses crime data from 1997 all the way through to 2005 and looks at every year consistently. In 1995, there were 9 states taking part. In 1997, there were 12. By 2004, there were 29 states submitting reports. So this data gets more and more accurate year on year and builds up quite a large comprehensive picture of what's going on. And by 2004, the NIBRS covered approximately 20% of the nation's population, and it recorded about 4 million individual crimes. Now, that's only about 16% of the crimes in the United States, so this is not a comprehensive representative sample, but as I said, I think it's a good starting point. Especially because this is the largest study of its kind that I could find that focused specifically on Halloween night and the 2 weeks before and the 2 weeks after, and the specific tracking of sexual offences. And what were the results? Across all of those years, a total number of 67,307 sex offences were coded for 67,045 victims. The most common offence category was forcible fondling at 63%, followed by forcible rape at 15%, forcible sodomy at 12%, sexual assault with an object at 6%, and statutory rape at 4%. And this sounds pretty terrible until you take into account that these numbers are taken across the years 1997 to 2005, a span of 8 years. And once all of this data was put together by basically overlaying each year on top of each other, they were able to produce this graph. The spiky as hell line obviously indicating the actual number of reports on days, a nice smooth bell curve line of the average, which you'll notice follows a common pattern of highest crime rate in the summer and lowest in the winter, and the reference line is Halloween night. And the really interesting thing about that reference line, you will notice it's not even on a high spike. In fact, when you compare that to the chart referencing the 2 week prior and after, you can really see just how average the crime rate is on Halloween night in regards to sexual offences. It's really nothing noteworthy at all. Which is why the very first line of their after discussion is, this study found no significant increase in risk for non-familial children's sexual abuse on or just prior to Halloween. Now I can already hear the cries of the feminists and social justice warriors, "Strawman! Strawman! Laci didn't say children!" Like I said, this is just a starting point. The same authors did a second, shorter report using the data that they'd gathered from this paper to author this piece, Sex Crimes on Halloween, where in order to contextualize sex crimes against children, they examined over 5 million victimizations that took place in 30 states on or around Halloween in 2005, and compared it to all other types of crime. The most common types of crime from among the incident reports on Halloween and adjacent days were theft at 32%, destruction or vandalism of property at 21%, assault at 19%, burglary at 9%. Vandalism and property destruction accounted for a greater proportion of crime around Halloween compared to other days of the year, 21% versus 14%. Sex crimes of all types accounted for slightly over 1% of all Halloween crime. And then they go on to point out that 0.2% of that sex crime, the victim was a child. 1% of all the crime committed on Halloween is a sexual offense of any kind. This is hardly a Halloween rape epidemic, Laci. But just to be sure that I'm not missing anything, I want to look at a third source. And this one is from the FBI Crime Index Offenses Report, which provides a monthly breakdown percentage of a variety of crimes between the years 1996 and 2000. Now, obviously, you would expect that if rape was happening at a much higher rate on October 31st, you would expect to see a significant increase in reports either in October or November, as I said earlier. And if we look at forcible rape by month, you will notice that that doesn't happen on any of the years. Sorry, Laci, but this claim of yours that men use Halloween and Halloween costumes as an excuse to sexually assault or rape women or girls, the evidence just does not support your assertion at all. The only piece of evidence I could find in vague support of your position was this single piece from Boston.com, which references a spike in violent crime in Boston through the years 2006 to 2009 on Halloween, but also on July 4th and New Year's. And there is no further clarification for what they consider to be violent crime or whether sexual crime is counted within that definition. The second Halloween crime rates paper that we looked at did reference that vandalism and property destruction did seem to have a surge on Halloween night compared to other days. Maybe that accounts for that entire spike in Boston. Who knows? But that is as good a evidence as I could find to support your position, and it basically doesn't even do that. You know how feminists constantly talk about how there's this patriarchy and a rape culture normalizing the concept of rape and sexual assault to scare women into submission? Frankly, Laci, when you make bullshit claims like this that you just have with no evidence, and then the evidence is found that contradicts you, you are the person perpetuating this attitude. You are the one who is making women and girls unnecessarily scared to walk the streets. Anyway, I believe you had something else to say.
So let's go ahead and leave that crap in the past.
Or for your show.
Idea number 2, why settle for sexy? On the flip side of the coin, there's something weird about the fact that the female versions of costumes are always sexualized versions, even for little kids.
I notice you very quickly move that image off the screen, but let's look at it again. That is what you consider to be sexualized. It's just a long-sleeved leotard like dancers would wear. How much of a fucking Puritan are you that you consider that to be sexualized?
There's firefighter, and then sexy firefighter. There's pizzerette, and then a sexy pizzerette. Well, pizzerette's always sexy, but you get the idea. If you want to get sexy, that's awesome. But it shouldn't be the only option for costumes based on your sex, and certainly not imposed on little girls.
Well, it's a good thing that it's not women's only option then, isn't it? You can make your own costumes so you can look like whatever the hell you want. Just because there are sexy female versions of costumes, that does not mean that is what the women have to wear. Take a look at some of these images. There is nothing, absolutely nothing stopping any of these women purchasing the default costume on the left. Except for the fact that many women do not want to. Welcome to the free market.
When we have a choice over how our sexuality will be presented, we draw the line between sexual subjectification and sexual objectification. As more people speak up and talk about this, companies have actually started to crank out more costume options, so keep on rabble-rousing.
Oh, so you do understand how the free market works. Kind of. You're just going to make a big deal out of it anyway because reasons!
Idea number 3, maybe don't do blackface. You can still totally dress up as Crazy Eyes or Olivia Pope, just without the face paint. Dressing up in blackface has a long and ugly history. It started as part of minstrel shows, which used caricatures of black folks for comedy. The joke? Lol, black people, aren't they so stupid? Many people who do blackface are explicitly calling on racial stereotypes as part of their costume. It's a type of mockery that targets people based on their skin color. Even if disrespect isn't the intent, that doesn't change the impact. Blackface effectively reduces black identity to a costume. Modern-day racial inequalities aren't something that people of color can take off at the end of the day. They're a daily reality.
And what happens if their Halloween costume is a minstrel? They're not dressing as a black person, they're dressing as a person dressing as a black person. Meta. Seriously though, if you're going to complain about that when this movie exists, and you're not complaining about that, I'm gonna have to go ahead and ask you to fuck right off, you hypocrite.
Idea number 4, just like races aren't costumes, neither are cultures. Costumes like geisha or Indian rely on degrading racial and cultural stereotypes.
What? You are aware that geisha is a job title, right? If you're gonna tell someone that dressing as a geisha is them using a racial stereotype of, like, a Japanese person, then dressing as a fireman is using a racial stereotype of a white person. Does not fucking compute!
It also further normalizes white America's tendency to disrespect and mock cultures that are different from our own.
No, it doesn't. If you're going to go down this route, Laci, which rather ironically you do later without even realizing it, witch costumes reduce Wiccans down to nothing more than a stereotype. But that doesn't count, does it? Because Wicca was a Celtic thing, which means they were all white. But if we follow this logic, and it's only okay for you to wear outfits of things that your race has done, because you're totally not a racist, are you, Laci? Then it's actually totally fine for white people to dress as geishas. Because Fiona Graham exists, better known as Sayuki. Yes, she is an Australian Caucasian woman who is a geisha. In fact, she is the world's first Caucasian geisha. So I guess this now means when white people dress as geishas, they're not mocking Japanese culture or thinking of it as inferior, they are in fact emulating another white person, so that makes it okay. Or something.
The implication is that white culture is normal and superior.
I love how you just instantly equate normal to superior. In Western countries, Western culture is normal. Just like how in Eastern countries, Eastern culture is normal, how in Middle Eastern countries, Middle Eastern culture is normal, and so on and so forth. That does not necessarily make any of them inherently superior or inherently inferior to any other, they are just different. You are the one positing that anyone who does anything with Western culture instantly thinks it's superior. Because in your mind, all white people who aren't intersectional feminists are white supremacists or something.
Now, America's lack of cultural competency is nothing to brag about.
Oh god, I fucking love that. America is culturally incompetent. Almost like you think that America doesn't have unique cultures of its own that have developed over centuries. Seriously, Laci, your white guilt is showing big time.
Least of all with a tacky costume. There are a million costume possibilities, and I think we'd all do better tapping into our creativity instead of recycled toxic garbage.
This is the only thing you have said so far that I actually agree with, but for entirely different reasons. I just like seeing the lengths and ingenuity that people will go to create interesting costumes. Cosplay is not my thing, but I fucking love seeing what some people come up with, and I would love to see that amount of unique talent and inspiration roaming around on Halloween than parade after parade of shitty store-bought crap.
Alright babes, do you have more tips? Share them down below and keep it spooky out there, but you know, not too spooky. This also marks the end of Season 3! What? It's been an entire year!
And hopefully there's no Season 4.
Thanks for joining me for the ride. There's a bunch of other episodes to watch if you need your fix.
Nope.
And until then, stay bralette.
No. No. Oh no. No.